Welcome back to TC Talk Sports. You should know by now, but if you don't, I'm not doing a preview for the rest of the teams that I have to do, but instead I'm going to recap and talk about their seasons so far. I only got a couple teams left that I have to get out. If you missed or haven't been paying attention to the NBA much this year, this channel is the place for you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on here. And I'm not just basketball. I post stuff on here and TikTok, TC Talk Sports, every single day about a bunch of different sports, bunch of things going on. My motto is all sports, all the time. So far, I've lived up to that. If you're a sports fan, this is the place for you. Subscribe on here, follow on TikTok. You won't regret it. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the San Antonio Spurs, what they've been doing this year, how well they've played. Is Victor Wembanyama living up to the hype? Is he in a sophomore slump? Keep watching. I'll answer all those questions in this video. First up, Spurs currently 7-8. That's 12th in the West. Offensively, the numbers haven't been as good as I thought they would be, averaging 109 points per game. That's 24th in the league. However, they are 10th in total assists, and that is greatly part to one of their big offseason moves, which I'll get into in a little bit. Defensively, they've actually been really good. I thought they might not be this good. I mean, outside of block shots, because Wemby's probably going to average like 7 for the rest of the season, but they're only giving up 110 points per game. That's 5th best in the league, and they're 3rd in blocks. Obviously, Wemby's carrying over his season defensively from last year. I'll get into his specific numbers here in just a second, but offensively, I think this team just has to be better. They have to be better scoring the ball. Defensively, they're doing really well. Currently, Coach Popovich isn't coaching this team. He's dealing with some health issues, so the assistant coaches are taking over, and of course, everyone hopes that he gets better and we can see him return to the NBA floor very soon. One of the most hyped up prospects of all time in the history of the sport of basketball, Victor Wembanyama, now in his 2nd year last year, winning Rookie of the Year. I think he got snubbed for Defensive Player of the Year, but I think he's going to win it this year, so I think he'll be okay with that. Wemby has played 13 games so far this season, leads the team in points and rebounds. He's averaging 22.7 points per game and pulling in 10.5 boards per game. 2.8 assists, that number is going to be low this year because of a big offseason name that they added. 3.7 blocks per game, that leads the league. I mean, everyone knew that he was probably going to end up leading the league in blocks. Honestly, by the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if this number is closer to 5, which is insane. And at that point, you can't not give him Defensive Player of the Year. His biggest game, everybody knows, last week versus the Wizards, 50 points. Wemby dropping a 50 bomb on the Wizards. One of the worst defensive teams in the league, one of the worst teams in the league defending centers, but 50 still an insane number. He shot 8 for 16 from beyond the arc. A lot of people hating on and getting on him about shooting so many threes. I mean, I don't want to see him shooting that much from outside. I'd like to see him down low because he can still score 50 with only a couple threes per game, I believe, but 50% from 3, I mean, that's pretty nuts for him. 7'5", whatever he is. On the year, he's shooting 33.9% from beyond the arc, but he's taking 8.6 threes per game. It is kind of cool just watching him cross over and shoot over a 7-foot defender that has no chance of blocking that shot. But, I mean, at that size, you want to see him in the paint just dominating and dunking on people. I mean, if he ends up shooting like 40% from 3, that would be nuts. But I think me, and confident in saying a lot of other fans, would like to see him in the paint more. One of the biggest offseason moves, kind of a weird move, I think, the Spurs signing Chris Paul. He is now 39 years old. However, I do think this is a good move for the Spurs. They are kind of in a rebuilding stage, and you're not going to rebuild with Chris Paul being your starting point guard. But I like the idea of bringing in one of the best point guards of all time, obviously a veteran player in this league. Kind of just teaching the younger guys the ways of the NBA. I thought maybe he would help Wemby with his assist numbers, ball handling, decision-making, those type of things that Chris Paul has been so good at his entire career. Statistically wise, I don't know how well CP3 would have did on this team, but as of right now, he's averaging 10.4 points per game, 8.4 assists. That is 7th best in the league. I do have a futures bet with Chris Paul averaging 10 assists per game because I figured if they don't run a pick and roll and throw a lob to Wemby 4 or 5 times a game, then they are completely missing out on this offense. They have been involved in pick and rolls, not as, like, I literally think every single time those two are on the floor, you run a pick and roll. 8.4 assists, though, at 39 years old, 7th best in the league. Good season so far for Chris Paul. He's still shooting 38% from three, which is a good number for him. He's not a crazy three-point shooter. He's not going to take too many per game. And as you know, he's a sneaky on-ball defender, averaging 1.4 steals per game. So far, a successful signing for the Spurs. October 31st versus the Jazz. Paul almost putting up a triple-double. He scored 19 points, 10 assists, and 7 rebounds. He's rebounding the ball well for his size and his age, but obviously the best part of his game, assisting. That assist number is going to be closer to 9 or 10 come the end of the season. Jeremy Sohan, throughout his entire career, I said stinks. He's not going to be a good NBA player. I mean, last year, not too good of a year for him. Nothing, I mean, he played well at times, but nothing crazy. He played 7 games, the first 7 games of the season. Now he needs surgery on his thumb. And I think it was kind of refreshing for Spurs fans to see him play well at the beginning of the year. In those 7 games, he averaged 15.4 points, 7.7 rebounds, and 3 assists. Against Houston, he put up 22 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists back on October 28th, probably his best game of his career. I kind of feel bad for Spurs fans because I assume they weren't too happy with his play last year, maybe not happy with the draft pick in the first place. He was playing well at the beginning of the year, and unfortunately, going down with an injury, he's going to miss a good chunk of time. But I do think they are a pretty deep team, and I don't think they'll really miss him as we move on through this season. One of the most underrated players, I think, in the league, he's back from injury now. He's played in 4 games up to this point, is Devin Vassell. I just think he's super underrated. I think he's one of the better three-point shooters in the league. And so far this season, Spurs fans have seen him passing the ball, scoring in the mid-range, going to the rim, scoring in the paint. But shooting-wise, I think he's one of the most underrated three-point shooters in the league. And I really think he's going to help this team be somewhat successful this year. I mean, I don't think they're going to be a championship contending team for a couple years now. Wemby definitely has to stay for that to happen. But Vassell, one of my favorite players, super underrated, and it's good to see him back and healthy. In the offseason, alongside signing 39-year-old Chris Paul, Spurs also signing Harrison Barnes. This was also another weird signing for me because I don't think he'd have too much of an impact for this team. And, I mean, he's playing well but not doing too much. He started every game this year, averaging 28 minutes per game, putting up 9.2 points, shooting 38% from 3. I mean, nothing crazy, nothing that jumps off the page. He is getting up there in age also, but obviously bringing him in to be a locker room guy, a veteran presence for this generally young team. He's starting, not playing a super high amount of minutes for a starter, but he's been playing decent for the Spurs so far. Draft night, San Antonio Spurs taking who I think should be one of the favorites to win Rookie of the Year. I said that before the year started, and this year he's been in that starting lineup, and his minutes have increased since the beginning of the year. He's now at 7 starts on the year. Stephon Castle, they took him 4th overall out of UConn. He's a champion. He's a winner. He knows how to play good basketball, and we are finally starting to see that. His numbers and minutes increasing every game, really. Starting to really find and play his role with the Spurs team. 9.9 points per game, 3 assists. He's shooting 29.8% from 3. That number, I mean, it has to be better. If he wants to score more, he's not afraid to shoot the 3. He's not one of the better shooters from this draft, one of the better overall players, but, I mean, he's got to get that number up if he wants a chance to score more and win Rookie of the Year. Coming out of college, you knew he'd be a good defender so far, averaging 0.9 steals per game. I think that number will be higher as his minutes get higher and he plays more games in the NBA. But I think the signing of Chris Paul benefits Stephon Castle the most. You bring in a highly rated young prospect with a lot of potential. You bring in Chris Paul, a very good, he's been one of the best point guards in the league his whole career. You bring him in to teach him the ways of the NBA, Chris Paul, to be Stephon Castle's sensei. I think really when they drafted Castle, signing Chris Paul, I think that's just a great combination. They're even playing on the floor at the same time, which is definitely going to help Castle's career, because I think at the end of Castle's career, he can end up being a very good NBA player. My player to watch for the Spurs coming into this year, I would have said Julian Champagnie, small forward, power forward type of guy, depends where they play him. He started every game so far this season for the Spurs, averaging 10.9 points, shooting 37% from 3, while pulling in 5.3 rebounds per game. He had a couple really, really good games last year for the Spurs. He's been in the league a couple years now out of St. John's. I think he's a low-key good player. I mean, this team is pretty deep with guys like Keldon Johnson, Malachi Brahman off the bench. Even a guy like Blake Wesley, he's more of a guard, but Zach Collins, him and Champagnie can kind of rotate in and out if they have to, but Champagnie can score the ball, he can shoot threes, obviously shooting 37% from three this year. He's a physical guy, he's a solid role player that I think any team would really be happy to have. My prediction for the Spurs in the offseason, I think they did get better. I mean, I don't think Harrison Barnes is going to have too much of an impact for the Spurs, but bringing in Paul, he's just going to make every player on this team better, whether they're actually playing in games or not, because I can only imagine those practices with Greg Popovich and Chris Paul on the floor at the same time. Unless Wemby has a crazy, insane year and he ends up averaging like 35 and 16 a game, I don't see this team making the playoffs. Like I said earlier, they are in a rebuilding phase. Once Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes are done, I think they're just going to rely more on these younger guys. But I think this is going to be a good year and a fun year to watch for the Spurs, really. I think Chris Paul is just going to have an impact on everybody on this team, but they're just not going to make the playoffs. Some of these other teams are way too talented for them. They did just beat the Thunder yesterday at the recording of this video, but, I mean, worse teams beat better teams pretty much every night in the NBA. But in conclusion, San Antonio Spurs will not make the playoffs this year.